Dragon, a legendary creature typically scaled or fire-spewing, with serpentine, reptilian or avian traits. A mythical beast rarely seen but often talked about in folklore and tales of heroism. To all intents and purposes, the story isn't much different for the Dragon 32 home computer. Announced by Dragon Data in June and launched in August 1982, poised and ready to compete with other micros in the booming UK computing industry. A Welsh entrant into an area dense with Cambridge and Oxford-based micro industries. The pride of its origin is clear in the name of both the company and the machine born from it. But before we delve into the details of this almost mythical machine, let's set the scene, starting with the fledgling home micro era of the early 80s. This was a time of excitement, a time of innovation, and this was no more apparent than with the Sinclair ZX80 and ZX81 computers. Produced by Clive Sinclair, these machines were designed to weave their way into homes throughout the country and establish the home computer as a necessity rather than an obscurity. The route to this was to piggyback on the excitement of the new technology whilst offering a price many could afford. The machines did their job and sold in reasonable numbers, but the landscape was evolving at a significant rate. Over in the United States, machines like Tandy's TRS-80 were sapping up the market, along with Commodore's VIC-20, and on the wind was a whispering of a new 64KB machine straight from Jack Trammell's drawing board. Sinclair needed to innovate, both to improve on earlier technology and stave off competition from the likes of Acorn's BBC Micro and the plethora of other home computer companies wanting a slice of digital pie. Unveiled in April 1982, the Sinclair Spectrum did just that, offering a full-colour home micro for less than £150, and with the scope for advanced software and games alike. But Sinclair wasn't known for fast shipping, and it would take a good 6 months for the Spectrum to start shipping out at an acceptable rate. In these early technological days, 6 months was a lifetime, and several machines would emerge whilst customers were still waiting for their Spectrums to arrive. These included the Grundy New Brain, Jupiter Ace and Dragon 32 in the UK alone, whilst the Commodore 64 and Franklin Ace stepped out in the States, and the Sharp X1 and Fujitsu FM7 in Japan. There was still a lot to play for. With each new machine that popped up, there was a company behind it pushing their talents, eager to make a mark, and Dragon Data were no different. The original Dragon 32 plan had been laid out by Swansea-based Metoy. Metoy had been founded in 1933 by Philip Ullman. Originally he founded a German tinplate toy company called Tip & Co, but escaped to the UK during the rise of the Nazis, and used the cash owed to him by Marks & Spencer to set up the new organisation. Originally located in Northampton, it relocated to Wales in the 50s and began distribution of railway construction and model kits. During the 70s, it was large enough to expand out into the new world of computing and set up an offshoot called Dragon Data, established to help process data for smaller companies. Noticing customers' frustration at the slow pace of delivery from computer manufacturers in the early 80s, Dragon Data saw an opportunity to launch its own micro and set to work in early 1982. As the year progressed, Dragon Data were optimistic about their new machine. Sinclair's Spectrums were shipping at a very slow rate, and Dragon had already agreed astute terms to stock their micros in Boots chemist stores throughout the country. The system would be based around very similar technology found in the TRS-80 Color Computer, affectionately known as the Coco. This meant that development could be swift, and the machine's announcement in June to launch time in August was completed in just 2 months. The specifications for this Welsh beauty weren't groundbreaking, but they were still more sophisticated than a lot of the competition. Consisting of a Motorola MC6809E clocked at 0.89 MHz, this was an 8-bit CPU, but it contained many 16-bit design elements and could beat off machines based on the MOS 6502 in terms of raw computational power. An MC6847 chip generated the video display of 256 pixels by 192 lines in monochrome, or up to 128 by 192 with 4 on-screen colours. With a 9-colour palette, it's responsible for the garish colours seen on the micros it inhabits. Sound is reasonable, served up with 1 voice and 5 octaves in BASIC, and 4 voices and 7 octaves via machine code. 32 kilobytes of RAM was provided. This was initially 16 kilobytes, but after getting wind of Sinclair's proposed 48K spectrum, was upped to 32. 16 kilobytes of ROM housed Microsoft Extended BASIC. Port-wise, the machine has a number of quirks. First, it features an analog joystick port, allowing for versatility and light pen adoption. Second, unusually for this era, there's a monitor out, providing a composite image which can be used with modern LCD screens. There's also a tape connector, ROM cartridge input, and scope for an additional accessory called the Dragon's Claw, allowing you to use BBC micro peripherals with your Dragon machine. To differentiate the machine from the Coco and avoid legal action, a number of improvements were also made. The first was the increase in memory. Base Cocos only shipped with 4 kilobytes of RAM as standard, with machines only accommodating a cut down Microsoft BASIC. However, the Dragon could pack the powerful and extended Microsoft BASIC from the go in its spacious 32 kilobytes of RAM. The monitor port and a full parallel port were also included, allowing fast standardized printer communication, something of a rarity among 8-bit machines. Poking the Dragon's ROM can reveal the letters DNS. These were added by its programmer Duncan Smead to the somewhat borrowed Tandy ROM. The Dragon was based on a reference design from Motorola, produced as an example of the MC6809E's capabilities, but Motorola were more than happy to help, knowing they'd get more sales from the leak of the information. The machine also has a power switch and reset button, features often omitted on machines of the time, with many regarding the power socket switch as a suitable current eliminator. Like the original TRS-80, Coco, and indeed other machines such as the Texas TI-99, the limitations of the ROM meant the machine was unable to display lowercase characters. This wasn't a problem for gaming use, but it severely impacted their penetration into educational and business markets, which was a shame given some of the more suitable technical quirks. Still, as standards of the day went, it was a reasonable machine. The Dragon's launch date and almost immediate availability in high street shops attracted a spike of interest, with several independent software developers jumping on board, including Microdeal, who had experience with Tandy's Coco. The magazine Dragon User also emerged quite quickly, providing promise for the Welsh machine. As this was an era where new machines could appear and disappear with hardly a recognising nod, these early signs bode well for Dragon. As well as selling well amongst Welsh inhabitants, the Dragon 32 fitted into an area of the market that was cheaper than the BBC Micro, but not too overpriced that it put off potential Sinclair customers, selling for a reasonable £175. It also possessed the rugged look of Acorn's BBC machine, with a real keyboard and large plastic case capable of supporting a monitor or small television. If you were looking for a well-built machine with room for expansion, then the Dragon seemed a good direction to go in. Pushed on by favourable reviews, Personal Computer News charted the machine as the 3rd best-selling machine on September the 15th, 1982, and it would go on to sell over 40,000 units before 1982 was out. Supply was outstripping production. However, as 1982 drew to a close, Metoy's financial situation was looking dire. Its core toy business had been losing money at an increasingly frantic pace, and this was affecting Dragon Data's finances. Despite the Dragon 32's success, banks were unwilling to provide finance amidst an increasingly saturated micro market. Managing Director Tony Clark began discussions with various companies and institutions for refinancing options. The Welsh development agency bought a 23% stake, and Prutech, the high-tech investment arm of Prudential Insurance, snapped up 42% and the controlling stake. Metoy were left with just a 15.5% share, but this enabled Dragon Data to continue development and contract out Race Electronics to assist with delivery demand. Part of this deal with the Welsh Development Agency was to also move to a larger manufacturing premises at Kenfig, near Port Talbot. Of course, this made sense, but large overheads are only good when large demand is present. The input of investment shifted Dragon Data to become the largest privately owned company in Wales, and the increased production allowed chains such as Dixon's and Comet to begin stocking the popular machines. 10,000 Dragon machines were being produced per week, with Dragon Data foreseeing no drop-off in their fortune, even in the wake of the Sinclair Spectrum and Commodore 64 now entering the high street chains such as W.H. Smith's and John Menzies. However, there were problems in weight, some foreseeable, some not. The first was the specification. The CPU was pretty powerful compared to the Z80 and 6502 chips found in the Spectrum and Commodore machines, but it wasn't mainstream. We all know that success often lies with third-party development, and due to the painful process of having to rewrite games from other platforms from scratch, many didn't bother, with exceptions like Memotech already having a line of software for the virtually identical Coco. Talking of platforms, other machines had better graphic and text support, with the Dragon built on hardware that was now some 3 years old. In high resolution mode, the Dragon could only display 2 colours, and only 4 on screen in standard resolutions. Coupled with this, it couldn't combine text and graphical modes, further adding to development woes. Other contenders had also begun to pop up with the likes of the Auric 1 and Memotech MTX. This led to increased market saturation, with the Commodore 64 and Spectrum emerging as the dominant force, the latter now selling 16KB models for under £100. Suddenly, combined with the summer lull, those 10,000 units being produced per week started to stack up in warehouses. The shine was again starting to look rather grim, and Dragon's advertising, pretty much telling buyers to leave the coding to the experts, didn't help matters. Not in their nature to be pessimistic, Dragon Data continued planning out a line of expansions. The first was a 5¼ Dragon DOS-based disk drive. The second was a new OS 9 operating system licensed from Microware Systems, and the third was a 64KB RAM upgrade and subsequent standalone system. The disk drives were planned for April but arrived in September at £275 or £475 for twin drives. Unfortunately, not before a third party, Premier Delta, had launched their own. It seems the delay was costly, as the Delta operating system was generally deemed superior to Dragon DOS and took a greater market share. The 64K RAM upgrade, which was initially announced as a single board swap for £75, was now advertised as a £100 whole lower case swap by May, offering an additional RS-232 serial interface and second basic ROM, essentially converting 32 systems to the same specifications as the anticipated Dragon 64. The second ROM allowed booting in 64KB mode by shifting the basic to occupy the upper 16K of RAM, but oddly meant the disk drive functionality was unavailable as it mapped into the cartridge port's RAM space. However, despite the promises, 32 owners wouldn't see any such upgrades before the year was out. Dragon also announced that the new Dragon 64 would arrive on US shores, distributed and ultimately manufactured by Tano Corporation. Dealers were anxious about the price war between Commodore, Atari and Texas in the States, and it was believed a robust, reliable system like the Dragon could deliver higher profit margins, therefore spiking interest in retailers. Launching before the UK on the 26th of August at $399, it also bundled with a spreadsheet, mail merge and word processor. Dragon announced that 2 further systems were in the pipeline, the first being a direct competitor for the high-end BBC Model B hardware, and the second a full-blown business system aimed to compete with the IBM PC. It seems an amalgamation of these was prototyped the following year, featuring 2 MC6809E processors, a numeric keypad, 128 or 256KB of RAM and the new OS 9, but it never made it to market. Back in the UK, the US deal didn't help managing director Tony Clark. Now sitting on a mountain of unsold Dragon 32s, shareholders gave a helping nudge and Tony left the company for personal reasons. On September the 12th, Prutech, who also held the major share in General Electric Company, asked Brian Moore, the GEC deputy director, to take over the reins at Dragon Data, along with a £2.5 million investment to keep the company moving forward. This saw GEC effectively take over of Dragon, working out perfectly as GEC were keen to enter the home micro market themselves by now. With 80,000 Dragon 32s sold to date, it was hoped that the Christmas period would shift most of the excess stock. But before Christmas would arrive, Metoy, the instigator of the Dragon and still a 15% shareholder, had called in the receivers. Its overall toy line just wasn't performing, and a management buyout led to the formation of Corgi Toys Limited. Prutech upped its shares in Dragon to 49% at this point and made sure to push the message home that Metoy's demise would not affect the ongoing operation of Dragon Data and its expanding computer line. Ever keen to push forward, the grey Dragon 64s appeared in November, with more pleasing keyboard aesthetics, sporting a smaller font on the keys themselves, although still lacking a lowercase mode in operation. Also, it was just in line for Christmas, priced at £225 and poised to demonstrate that the Dragon brand was still strong and going places. The 64 was well received over this period, both in the UK and US operations, after being promoted at the Color Computer Expo in Pasadena. The French arm of Dragon was also in its infancy, and at this point by Christmas 1983 had shipped 20,000 Dragon 32s themselves. As 1984 rolled around, the 64K upgrade for 32 owners was still not in sight, but a new plan was put into motion. Users could exchange their 32s for 64s, eliminating the need for modifications or costly technical work, but with the trading cost set at £140, many users preferred the option of selling their current 32 models and simply buying a Commodore 64 while still having cash to spare. It had also become apparent that some software would no longer function on later revisions of the 32. Early developers of the machine had found a cunning speed-up poke which allowed overclocking of the processor to a whopping 1.8 MHz. However, newer machines seem to have lower tolerances, possibly due to lower quality components which would not operate with this poke. Games such as Up Periscope and Flight Simulation just refused to work. Consumer patience was being tested and allegiances were falling stray, with even more machines entering the market. Owners of disk drives would be graced with the somewhat late arrival of OS 9 by March, offering multitasking, resource sharing over networks, file ownership and even the possibility of a graphical user interface. For just £40 you got the single 5¼ floppy and a manual with additional applications such as the Stylograph word processor, Dynacalc spreadsheet and RMS database available for between £55 and £80. Drive owners were keen to snap the software up, providing the machine with some added life, with various programming languages available for the operating system. It would later transpire that Dragon, now known as GEC Dragon, never actually paid a licensing fee to Microware, likely due to the troubles on the horizon. Over the next couple of months, GEC would push out more professional advertising for the Dragon machines, with double-page spreads selling the perks of the computer with potential promised printers, monitors and cassette decks on the way. And new machines also promised. The first was a transportable 64K machine expected to include a modem, 3.5-inch Sony disk drive, and reported to be compatible with previous Dragon hardware. The machine was called Project Alpha and demonstrated at the Consumer Electronics Trade exhibition in May. The 3.5-inch drive also seems to point at GEC's desire to launch an MSX compatible system in the UK. MSX was an attempt to standardise 8-bit home computers emerging in Japan. You can watch my MSX video to find out more. And as part of that standard, the new Sony 3.5-inch disk drives had taken precedent over Hitachi's 3-inch drives. It seemed likely that this alpha system was a middle step on the road to MSX. The other new machine, called the Beta machine, was the souped-up amalgamation of the systems announced the prior year. However, at the same time these machines were being exhibited, Dragon Data had some problems. A month prior, BHS had slashed the prices of its Dragon 32 stock to £87.50, as they cleared shelves to stock a competitor machine. Boots had also cut prices and announced they would stop stocking the 32. In reality, they were looking to stock the Dragon 64 instead, but it sent a negative message out to the public, and in any case, many saw the 64 as just a slightly expanded 32 in the face of other, more capable machines. In the wake of declining sales, GEC Dragon went into administration during the spring of 1984, with Tano over in America also stopping support for the dwindling machine. Dixon's quickly slashed the price of their stock to £79.99, including a bundle of free software. Dragon 64s were lowered to £169.99 and disk drives for less than £100. As with all price cuts, this actually formed a new wave of users who, unaware of compatibility or ongoing support, snapped up the discounted equipment and entered into the new digital age. 100 machines were also given to Weetabix, who ran a promotion offering a pretty substantial prize, including a Dragon 64, television, disk drive, cassette deck and Space Invaders type game. To be honest, I'm tempted to try and enter myself even now. Software houses like Salamander Software began to re-evaluate and quickly entered talks with Tandy to see if they could sell titles to the American market. Something you question why they didn't do earlier, especially with a massive market available overseas, which required very little work to adapt Dragon software to, given the Coco's some 95% compatibility following just a few address tweaks. Still, they didn't need to worry because the UK Dragon user count was over 200,000 at this point. Dragon wasn't quite dead yet, and several bidders would queue up to grab themselves a bargain. One of these was Tandy, who, failing to capture the UK market with their own computers, which were twice the price as Dragon's offering, saw an easy route in with a largely compatible machine. However, they were put off by existing liabilities and outstanding stock, and their bid was rejected by the receivers. This is when Spanish company Eurohard SA stepped in, offering a reported £1 million and securing the company and a portion of its existing stock. Eurohard had actually been in talks with Dragon before they went under, seeking to license the machines for sale in Spain, and so a cheap buyout made perfect sense. The buyout agreement meant GEC would continue marketing in the UK, and a new company, Touchmaster, backed again by Prutech, would provide after-sales support. Touchmaster took up residence at Dragon's site in Port Talbot, consisting of mostly the same employees. A new deal was then forged with Comet to take existing stock, and Dragon 64s were soon selling for just £130. This swelled the user base, further sparking a resurgence that would last for the next few years. The mid-decade year of 1985 was looming, and over in Spain, Eurohard had embarked on a BBC Micro-inspired idea with the assistance of the Spanish government to sell their newly named Dragon 100 and Dragon 200 machines alongside an educational television show that would air in schools and would introduce the country to the wonderful world of 8-bit computing. Eurohard had purchased 13,000 Dragons as part of a takeover and were selling at £200 for the 100 and £300 for the 200 model. They also began production at their own plant in Cáceres. Keen to expand on Dragon's MSX ideas, they also signed an agreement with Microsoft to be one of the first distributors of MSX machines in the West, producing the Dragon MSX prototypes in May 1985. Based around the MSX architecture, these were, of course, incompatible with the earlier Dragon machines. However, on selling only 17,000 standard Dragon machines in the Spanish home market, less than anticipated, and giving away another 20,000 to schools and institutes through the government subsidy program, Eurohard were unable to expand further and production of the new MSX range ceased. Back in the UK, Eurohard had appointed CompuSense to try and shift further Dragon units from their own stocks, but the software market was starting to crumble. Webster's, one of the biggest distributors, had ceased handling Dragon software, whilst the long-standing Dragon user magazine was forced to switch to subscription only from June 1986. In May 1987, Eurohard closed up its Dragon operations, and in January 1988, Microdeal, the original main supporter of the Dragon, announced they were pulling out of the market. This didn't leave much left for Dragon owners, and the committed Dragon User magazine finally gave up the ghost in January 1989 after being run by Bob Harris for the last 7 issues from his own pocket. Bob had been running Harris Micro Software, one of the most avid and final supporters of the hardware. The last Dragon show was held in September 1994 at a school in Liverpool, on the same day as their awesome fair, marking the end of this ferocious, mythical beast. But it would be tragic to end on such a depressing note, for although the Dragon led a short life, it was a fiery one, if a rather vivid green fire at that, but with an admirable collection of games and software. Here are some of my favourite titles on the Welsh machine. Phantom Slayer is an incredibly early first-person shooter, in fact one of the earliest, and the eerie stalking phantoms incite a definite feeling of dread. Jet Set Willy is a great conversion of the classic Spectrum game, although displayed in monochrome form due to high resolution requirements. Chucky Egg, another classic and unmistakably green here. Donkey King is a garish incarnation of the arcade classic. I don't know, there's something I just love about this garish palette though. Airball sees us in an isometric perspective, and it's a giant leap forward over a lot of previous Dragon games. Later ported to the Amiga, Atari ST and even Game Boy Advance, it really shows off the Dragon hardware. Rommel's Revenge does a grand job of imitating vector graphics, again using high resolution mode, but the alternative and distinctly green monochrome variant. Funnily enough, the Dragon doesn't actually have black, it's just a very dark green, it's just so much green. Backtrack is next, and again I love the colours here. This is a maze game where you have to guide your chappie through various rooms seeking keys. Marvellous! And last is Leggett, again bright but using distinctly different hues. I sometimes think that a restrictive palette can bring out the best in a screen. The premise here is to jump through the gaps whilst avoiding enemies, and it works beautifully. So there we go, that was, and indeed is, the Dragon series of home computers. The computer that inspired its user base, gave us green-induced eye strain, albeit in a pleasing fashion, brought us all a little closer to the Welsh-rooted micros, and reminded us that it's possible just to hang on in there despite soaring competition and waves of obstacles telling us otherwise. The Dragon legacy lives on through its committed fanbase with newer games such as Glove, a Gauntlet clone released a few years back. Apparently a company called California Digital bought the remaining Tano Dragon stock, and since 2009 you can buy them for about $49 brand new, although shipping to the UK is about $90. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look into a little known computer of the past. Please give it a thumbs up if you liked it, or a thumbs down if you hated it. Click a video below, subscribe for more, or contribute to my Patreon to support me. In any case, thank you very much for watching, and as always, have a good and entertaining night. I'd like to take this moment to give a big thanks to John from Stig's World for helping me with some footage of Dragon machines. I sold one of my machines a while back, so it was a massive help. Please visit his channel at the link below. Also, big thanks to the Dragon Archive for allowing me to borrow some content. If you're after a vast selection of Dragon internet things, then head over to worldofdragon.org. Most of the backing music in this video is by Snowkitten. You can pick up the Greatest Hits album at snowkitten.bandcamp.com. And of course, a massive thank you to every single one of my patrons for making this channel possible, some of whom's names are now scrolling across the screen. Godspeed, and I'll see you in the next video.